Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, before we dive into today's video, I do want to let you know, if you haven't already seen the posts about it, that we actually have two group tours that are currently live and available for booking to anyone who wants to do it, not just patrons and members. I'll have the link in the description for both of those, as well as in a pinned comment. The first one is a group trip to Italy. We're going to go to Rome and Florence, and that'll be the first week of April 2025. And then at the end of April, April 25th, we're going to be doing a tour that leaves out of Berlin. We go Berlin, Dresden, Prague, Bratislava, and Vienna. And you can click on the links for either one of those and read all about the itinerary, see exactly what's going on, where we're going to be, and those kinds of things. And of course, you are more than welcome to come early, stay later for those tours, and do additional things while you're there. I'm going in early for the Italy tour and probably staying late in Vienna for that tour. So check those things out. If you have any questions at all about either one of those, you can let me know. Just shoot me an email, vloggingthroughhistory@gmail.com, or fill out a question form on the tours themselves. We're going back to the channel Trust Me Bro today, how the Roman Empire actually fell. And I am going to be uploading probably tomorrow, next day at the latest, a video of our walking tour from Rome that we did on the first day of our tour that we did this past April. And it's basically the same tour that we're doing this coming April. And that'll be over on VTH Extra, so you can check that out on there. Link is in the description, so you can check out Trust Me Bro without my commentary, see all of his great content there. Let's dive into this one.
In this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the rise of ancient Rome, and then I'll be focusing in on what I believe to be the three main pillars of ancient Rome's downfall. The Roman Empire. Let me tell you, as a man, this is a topic that is never far from my mind. Although you may think you have an idea of how the Roman Empire either rose or fell, I'm going to assume that there's probably some holes in your knowledge. And today, my goal is to fill those holes. Your holes. Rome, all good stories, started from humble beginnings. In the very early days, circa 753 BC, Rome was primarily an asylum city and just a stop in the trade route between the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south.
That's one of the things that always amazes me about the Roman Empire, is that you can go back to different moments in the early years of what became the Roman Empire. Of course, it was a kingdom of Rome and then a republic and then eventually an empire. But there were times when it was just one of a bunch of other city-states, kind of, nations, whatever you want to call groups of people at that time. And any one of them could have been the ones that rose up. But there were a lot of factors that went into Rome being able to be successful when others couldn't.
What do I mean by asylum city? Rome started as a place where thieves, murderers, runaway slaves, outcasts, and more could have the rare opportunity to become genuine citizens. Rome was a city of refugees and immigrants. This openness, in part, gave Rome the opportunity to become as big as it eventually became. A lot of commonly considered Roman innovation was actually heavily inspired by their northern neighbors, the Etruscans, such as their alphabet.
Did you just say the Etruscans? Etruscans, yeah.
Gladiatorial games and political structure. From the beginning in 753 BC to 509 BC, there was 7 kings. But in 509 BC, the last king of Rome was expelled for unsavory reasons. And from that point onward, it was decided that no one man should have all that power. The new system that was introduced gave 2 elected officials 1 year of power each, instead of a single monarch. Which, if you think about it, is pretty crazy, because whose idea was it to let butterflies rule anything anyway? Below the 2 elected officials was a senate of 300 patricians, which controlled the 2 elected officials. And below them were the plebs, the masses, essentially people just like the Senate, although they weren't born into the right family and therefore had no say.
So here's the thing. A lot of different systems of government can work so long as the people that are operating within that system do so in good faith. I mean, you could make just about any system of government work. You can make an absolute monarchy work well for the people if the absolute monarch is motivated by doing what's best for the people and not what's best for him and a small group of people. You can make, democracy work. You can make a tribal system of government work. You can make communism work. You can make any system work as long as the people in power do it from a place of good faith. The problem is, and what happens with Rome, is that corruption and a desire for power and scheming and all of the things that are common to human nature got the best of them.
Plebs were mad about not having any real say in politics, and after 200 years of fighting, the Roman Republic was born. The plebs populated most of the army, so when the plebs weren't having their way, they'd threaten to emigrate and fight for other cities. Consistently over time, the Senate would begin submitting to their demands. Hey, if you don't give us any say in what goes on around here, we're gonna go fight for someone else.
What do you want? I'll do anything.
In 390 BC, Rome was almost entirely eliminated by a surprise attack, and although they survived the attack, this spooked them enough to trigger a serious military reform. The Roman legions were divided into multiple smaller groups known as manipula, allowing them to be more mobile and more efficient in battle. Over the next 200 years, the new military style was used to consistently expand and conquer. A 1,000 IQ play used by Rome was, instead of ruining the settlements they'd conquer, they would actually impose treaties of alliance with their newly conquered partners, which would allow them to fuel the Roman legions, allowing them to have a seemingly endless army.
That's a great point, and it's one of the reasons why we see such, especially in the aftermath of the Punic Wars, you start to see Rome kind of take things to a next level, because now there's not really any great equal enemy for them. You had Carthage that was kind of on the same level in many ways. So now Rome, once Carthage is out of the way, once the Greek Empire is not really a player anymore, Rome's now dealing with people who aren't on the same level as them technologically, even though there might be a lot more of them. And so they are really, really smart in how they start to assimilate all these groups. But then you get to the 1st century BC, and that's where corruption and a lust for power come to a whole new level among some of the individuals in power.
By 133 BC, there began to be a serious divide within the people of Rome as the wealth gap grew exponentially and the impoverished no longer had anything to lose. The Senate and the Roman people were no longer a unity. Some people did try to suggest offering free bread and public land to the impoverished, but these people were killed by the Senate.
So he talks about the Senate and the people of Rome, and that's where you see that symbol SPQR, that to this day you go to Rome and you see it like on the manhole covers and everything. It's the Senate and the people of Rome. That's who they were.
Hey, what if we give these people that can't afford to do anything, like a place to live and some food? It was about this time Julius Caesar came about, but for as famous as he was, his chapter in the book of ancient Rome was rather short. During the Civil War...
Yeah, but he comes about at a time when you had others who had done similar things. So, a couple of decades before Caesar, the groundwork had been laid for Caesar to do what he did by others who did similar things. People who wanted to hold on to power, people who used their military influence to get what they wanted.
Wars, he defeated rival generals and literally banged Cleopatra and gave her the Egyptian throne. Pretty crazy history class crossover episode. After some time with Cleopatra, Caesar returned to Rome, giving himself the title of Imperator, which means victorious commander, and essentially became a dictator. The people saw the writing on the wall and assassinated him rather swiftly. So yeah, there you go. That's the story of Julius Caesar. His rule only lasted 4 years. After Julius Caesar's assassination, his 19-year-old nephew came to power and ended up ruling for 43 years. He didn't abolish the Republic, but didn't necessarily relinquish total control either.
That's the thing that people forget, is that even though we refer to Augustus, who was Caesar's great nephew and adopted son, only adopted after his death, but he never, even though we refer to him as the first emperor of Rome, in his mind, or at least publicly, he wasn't an emperor. He was kind of the first among citizens. He was like kind of the lead guy among everyone who in theory was equal to each other, but he was emperor in all but name.
He gave himself the title of first senator, essentially an all-powerful political being. But although he had this power, he was able to not be assassinated. During his rule, times were relatively peaceful. Bread was given to the poor, gladiators were cooler than ever, and the city began to see early signs of modernization.
The leaders of Rome understood the importance of keeping the mob happy, right? So that's why they have games. It's why they have the giving out of the grain supply and things like that. And one of the reasons why you end up having this power struggle between Mark Antony and the guy who becomes Caesar Augustus is Octavian, is this fight over access to the grain supply.
After this peaceful period, there was an era of notably bad emperors that imposed ridiculous laws and did pretty horrible things.
Yep.
But then after that era, there was an era of good emperors, the most notable of which, and the last of which, was Marcus Aurelius, a man who was in power from 161 AD to 180 AD. He spent most of his reign on military expeditions, and in between battles he wrote Meditations, a book that today is still a bestseller and one of the most profound examples of Stoic philosophy.
One of the reasons why I think so many people are fascinated by the Roman Empire is because we have so much of the writings of these guys like Cicero and Julius Caesar and Cato and Marcus Aurelius. We have the things that they wrote in their own hand. I mean, we don't have the originals, but we have copies that were passed down from these guys.
I'd recommend giving it a read. After Marcus Aurelius came his son, and under the rule of his son began the end of the good times, and the beginning of the end began. Not long after, the Roman Empire was split into 4 states with 4...
Yeah, so Commodus is, of course, there's kind of a fictionalized version of him played by Joaquin Phoenix in the movie Gladiator, and he did fight in the Colosseum, but he didn't die that way. He was actually, I think, strangled to death in his bath by a wrestler, and after which, eventually, the Praetorian Guard would auction off the title of emperor to the highest bidder. And that is kind of the beginning of a series of centuries where very few emperors died natural deaths. And that's really the beginning of the end, like he said.
4 leaders, which did not last long as turmoil between the leaders and the states broke out into large-scale war.
Yeah, so you have an Augustus and a Caesar, I think it is, in the east and one in the west. And one of those guys is going to be Constantine, who is declared emperor when he's in the Roman city of Aboricum, which we call York in England today.
For a brief period afterwards, Rome was united once more for a final time, and the last emperor of the United Roman Empire ended his reign in 395 AD, and then his son split Rome into, for good, East and West. The eastern half would live on for another 1,000 years, but the western half would suffer and fall victim to the great migration of people, causing divide. So now that you have some context about ancient Rome, what caused it to fall? As you may have gathered, it wasn't just one thing, but more of a combination of things. You may already have some assumptions based off the context I provided, and if you're informed, you may already have your own opinions. But what I'm about to describe are, in my opinion, the top 3 reasons why Rome ultimately fell.
And let's keep in mind, as we often say with history, that people love to point to one event, to one moment. You know, the Eastern Roman Empire didn't fall because of the fall of Constantinople in 1453. It fell because of everything that led to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. That was just the event that sealed its fate. The Roman Empire in the West, you know, the one that we talk about as being, you know, the fall of Rome, you know, in like the 400s, that didn't happen because of events that happened then. It happened because of everything that happened before that led to those moments.
1. Corruption and mismanagement.
100%.
As you've probably noticed, it's not entirely impossible to believe that corruption was pretty common in the Roman Empire, and more specifically, all parts of ancient Rome. Ancient Rome went through multiple iterations of political structures, from monarchies, republics, to eventually empires, not to mention the sheer number of rulers in general. A funny example of blatant mismanagement was Commodus. He was the youngest emperor ever at only 15 years old. He was known to be a reckless, emotional ruler, which was obviously a recipe for disaster. The systems built by those before him made the day-to-day operations of the Roman Empire more or less self-sustaining and hard to mess up.
Which you had to have in an empire that was that big, that spread out, where there's no instant communication. You have to have governors and military on the frontiers, people that you can trust to do things pretty much independently and without direct input.
However, smaller things were definitely not as much of a challenge. Dude was literally a wannabe dictator / gladiator. And even though he was known as a reckless, emotional teenager, he was still in power for 15 years until he was eventually assassinated in a bathhouse. 193 CE followed Commodus's rule and became known as the Year of the Five Emperors, which, as you can probably assume, was because there was 5 different emperors in 1 year. One of which was...
Which you had in 69 AD, you had 4 emperors, kind of the same deal going on.
Assassinated in only 3 months, and another one literally bought his way into power and was killed 3 weeks later. The unity and the morale of the Roman Empire was low due to political chaos. The sheer size of the empire and the separation of the settlements made it easy for the different states to begin growing their own cultures and expressing their own autonomy, which eventually led to them breaking away and starting their own empires entirely.
Just put yourself in that situation for a minute and imagine in your own country if that happened today. If you had a scenario here in the United States where we went through 5 presidents in 1 year, and several of them came to power because of military power, or because of monetary influence, or because they had the guy before them killed. What a mess that would be.
The whole mismanagement situation kind of reminds me of a job I had when I was younger. I used to work at a restaurant, and the owner of this restaurant kept hiring the weirdest managers. Like, me and my coworkers all did great jobs. We all knew how to do our jobs, but every manager that came in was convinced that they knew how to do our job better than us. This happened so frequently that eventually me and my coworkers had no respect for the manager, and we honestly were just not interested in listening to this 45-year-old meth enjoyer try to tell us how to do our job. So that didn't last long. We didn't go ahead and start our own restaurant, but we might as well have. 2. Religious discourse. The Roman Empire traditionally worshipped the pantheon led by Jupiter, which was heavily tied to the Greek pantheon led by Zeus. When Christianity began to gain popularity, the new Abrahamic faith, based off of the not so highly favored Judaism, was treated rather similarly as a result. The Roman Empire saw new faiths as a threat to the empire as a whole.
That's true, but at the same time, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we think of, for example, Christianity as basically being persecuted by the Roman Empire all throughout the first couple of 100 years of Christianity. There were a couple of moments, couple of like brief periods where there was heavy persecution by the state and by the empire. Under Nero, for example, in the 60s AD, and then under Diocletian, there was a great deal of that as well. But in between, for the most part, while Christianity was kind of viewed with a side eye, it wasn't actively persecuted by the Roman Empire.
This religious discourse between the empire and the people and the people and the people was brutal. Larger, bloodier battles have been fought over smaller issues. Just look at modern examples for the destruction that can be caused over religious disagreements.
Yeah.
Rome didn't have any external religions gaining popularity within Rome, like Judaism, for example. Rome literally played a key element in the creation of Christianity.
That's true.
Which made it an entirely different battle.
That's true. When Christianity very rapidly goes from being illegal to being legal to being the official religion of the empire in a relatively short time, it was a big change, and it allowed Christianity to flourish and become the dominant religion of Europe.
Now, obviously, we know how the story ends, as Greek and Roman polytheistic religions are now referred to as mythology, yet Christianity is one of the most worshipped religions in the world.
Yep.
I feel like this is often more overlooked than it should be, or maybe I'm just looking too far into it, but I definitely feel like the transition of faith was the beginning of the transition out of the Roman Empire. Christianity was eventually mass adopted within the Roman Empire, and the church had massive power, although not everyone was totally on board. I feel like this has less to do with the fall of Rome itself, but at the time when Christianity was initially being introduced, Rome was already in chaos, and I feel like the introduction of this religious discourse on top of political discourse definitely poured more fuel on the fire.
I think that's fair.
3. Outside opposition.
Yeah.
Reasons number 1 and 2 are not exclusive to the Roman Empire and appear in every civilization at some point.
Yeah, and this is such an important aspect of this. The outside opposition is unsuccessful as long as the internal structure of the Roman Empire remains strong. But once the internal starts weakening, now you become more vulnerable to the external threats.
Because at the end of the day, all political structures are just groups of people, and people are dumb. My third and final reason falls into this basket as well too, but I believe this reason to be the most major nail in the coffin, as reasons.
And I think a lot of people see the third one and focus heavily on that. It was just the constant barbarian invasions that eventually weakened Rome. But again, those were only successful because of the corruption, because of the internal strife.
1 and 2 alone would have been able to sustain the Roman Empire for much longer, but reason 3 could have easily wiped out the Roman Empire by itself, and with the Roman Empire being more vulnerable from the chaos caused by the corruption and religious discourse, I believe that this third reason is the most important factor in Rome's demise. Let's focus in on one group of outside opposition to Rome. The Huns were a nomadic people, consisting of some of the most ruthless warriors of the time. They had been living across Asia and Eastern Europe, and wherever they were, others weren't. They left a trail of terror wherever they went, to put it lightly. And although they didn't interact with ancient Rome until later on, they still had a big impact on how Rome fell. The massive Hun conquests caused major influxes of refugees into the Roman Empire,
which had been a strength early on in the Roman Empire, but now when you've got weak internal security, it throws more chaos into things.
Now, like we originally mentioned, refugees are what helped build Rome originally, but unfortunately, this was not the same Rome, and these were not the same refugees. Originally, people came to a growing, thriving Rome as an accepting safe haven, but in this case, the refugees were surviving barbarian warriors fleeing the Huns, and they were being thrown into the middle of the chaos of the Roman Empire of the time. It seems obvious to try to incorporate these refugees into the Roman army, right? Well, not to the emperor at the time, as instead of incorporating them into the Roman army, they were exposed for labor or outcasted as they were deemed not a threat. This lack of foresight at scale left a lot of unhappy outsiders inside the empire, causing many parts of the outer regions to be taken by these refugees. Keep in mind, originally, when refugees came to the Roman Empire, they were accepted and given citizenship. These refugees were not. They were not accepted, and they were not exiled for the most part. They were simply in a purgatory of sorts. After the split of the Roman and Byzantine Empire, this problem only got worse and harder to manage, as Rome had limited resources and men to fight.
Did he mean the Roman and Byzantine Empire? Because I'm not sure what the word was he said back there.
476 AD, a barbarian king was the last to invade the Roman Empire as we know it, essentially concluding the fall of the Roman Empire. Although ancient Rome was no longer, to this day, the impact of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire is still very visible.
100%.
Mainly Christianity as a whole, which for the 1,000 years after the Roman Empire fell, still served primarily as the government across all of Europe. The Roman Empire had so much land to manage, too little funding for their army, too much chaos for sustainability, and too little progress for growth. One thing I do want to quickly mention is that this is more of a bro history lesson than anything else. So if you're looking for something to plagiarize for a school assignment, unless you want to get expelled, I'd suggest watching this just for fun.
That was good. That was a good, I mean, obviously in 12 minutes, you're not going to cover all the really nitty-gritty details of why the Roman Empire fell, but that at least kind of gives us an overview. And I largely agree with his conclusions that those were the factors, the internal corruption, the upheaval over religion and the changing nature of religion in the empire, and then, of course, the external threat. So add to that conversation. Talk about it. Use the comment section below. Check out the links that are pinned and in the description about the upcoming tours. Would love to have you come hang out with us. It's an amazing time. We do tours and see all kinds of historic sites during the day. And then at night we go out and find a pub or some place to hang out. So it's really, really a great time for us to get to spend a lot of time together. And I've made friends for life on these tours. Would love for you to be one of them. Thanks for watching.